Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our members of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position along with your favorite beverage to enjoy the discussion. We remind our audience to examine our show notes attached to each of our shows to better understand how our program functions. Before we get into our discussion today, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience of SmithWeekly, including Mark R., Chris P., Brian H., and Sean M. On the program today, we've got a new guest and company joining us. Mr. Wayne Koshman is with us. Wayne is the founder and CEO of Kenz Global Resources, a Saudi Arabia-focused private exploration company that has a number of projects prioritizing Arabian Nubian Shield type gold and copper prospects, covering concessions of about 732 square kilometers through various licenses and joint venture arrangements. Kenz Global Resources is seeking to list on a public exchange in the future, and you can learn more about the company via its website, kenzresources.com. Mr. Koshman, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Andrew, and I appreciate you bringing me on and introducing myself and wanting to hear a little bit about what we're doing in the Middle East, and hopefully I can provide your listeners with some broad aspects on, I think, this very interesting region that has been underexplored by particularly Western companies, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity not only for our company, but for many junior exploration companies looking for undeveloped region. As you said, the Arabian Nubian Shield. So thank you.
It's good to have you on the program and looking forward to talking about Saudi Arabia. Certainly we'll be getting into that in just a moment and some of the increasing competition and interest coming into Saudi Arabia as well. Wayne, you are new to the podcast. As such, why don't we start off here by you giving us your background and experience in the junior natural resource sector?
Sure. A lot of people would say I should actually make a movie about my background. It's somewhat a long road. I was born in Calgary, Alberta, in the mid '60s, and raised on a small country farm. So I was always around the oil and gas industry. I graduated in '88 with a finance degree, and ordinarily I would have went into oil and gas, but I've always been a little bit of an entrepreneurial spirit. So I was offered a couple nice jobs that would take me to senior level positions if I sat in them long enough. But I just never wanted to really have a paycheck. So I went on a commission sales with a real estate company. About 2 or 3 years later, I wanted to have a reason to leave Calgary. You know, I was born and raised in Calgary, and I had a job offer to work in Japan. My background has been a lot of martial arts involved, so I thought there would be a good opportunity to go to Japan and get away from Canada and see the world. And I did that for about 3.5 years. I got my black belt in Shotokan karate, and I met my wife of 33 years. We came back. Funny story. I took my wife to Calgary to introduce her to my parents prior to marriage, and that time it was minus 32 in Calgary, and she looked outside our farm window of our house, and the thermometer said minus 32. So she said, if I'm going to marry her, there's no way she's going to live in Calgary. So we ended up moving to Vancouver. We've been here for 33 years now, raised with children. My first experience with the mining sector was a very good old friend of mine, Chinese friend, back in the early 90s. This was when China was underexplored, underinvested sector in the gold mining. You know, China was looking for investment at that time, and they were looking for expertise in exploration. My friend Dominic, he called me one day and he said, Wayne, do you know what a gold adit is? I said, what's an adit? I had to actually look what an adit was. And of course, it's a horizontal driven shaft to locate different alterations in quartz veins, etc. But we started a company called Dynasty Gold that's still listed on the Canadian Stock Exchange. I spent almost 5 years in China learning exploration game through a lot of very good geologists. One of my mentors was Tukey Angus. He was originally my lawyer with Faskins. I think most people might know Tukey. Unfortunately, he passed away last year, but He was one of the founders of B2, First Quantum, Bima, Nevsun, Ventana, Endeavor. The list goes on. So I had a very good teacher in terms of understanding the deal making side. He was a lawyer and a deal maker, but also I had the fortunate opportunity. I think over my career, probably visited maybe 500, 600 mine sites, exploration sites, and that covers about 12 countries. And I sold my interest in Dynasty Gold after about 5 years. I moved on to Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and then I worked in Mexico for 5 years on a company now listed called Regency Silver, silver prospects. And within that period of time, I also moved into the oil and gas sector for a number of years. I lived in Tunisia for about 5 years on a company called Voyager Oil and Gas. Fortunately, had one of the largest shale gas discoveries in North Africa. But unfortunately, the Arab Spring in 2011 started in Tunisia. So after 2 years of frustration dealing with the new government we called force majeure, that taught me some lessons about working in countries that have dictatorships. It's sometimes a difficult thing. Most recently, before Kenz, I founded a company called Red Sea Resources in Egypt. Very similar scenario. I saw I'm always, I like to go where other companies aren't yet. Maybe it's fortunate and unfortunate. I see a lot more opportunities, but unfortunately, a lot of times you have to make your own, there's no followers, so you have to clearly make some decisions. I went to Egypt, was there for about 3 years. I was involved in the first bid round along with B2 Gold, Barrick, a number of very well Egyptian families. And we fortunately won 5 blocks there. Red Sea is still currently in the process of drilling. It's a private company. It looks like they'll be going public sometime either at the end of this year or the first quarter next year. And at that time, I decided to leave the company. I saw the opportunity in Saudi Arabia, where there's a reforming of the whole economic and social fabric of Saudi Arabia by Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And I saw that they were changing the mining laws similar to what Egypt was, but they've done a fantastic job with changing the mining laws to bring in foreign investment into the exploration and mining sector. So that's how I ended up in Saudi Arabia. Been there for 3 years right now, and we're moving ahead with a number of very good exploration projects.
Wayne, extensive background, various jurisdictions, different companies, different commodities, all kinds of different things. I appreciate you going through that and walking through. For the audience who may not know who you are, and I'm sure this is the first time for some of them hearing from you, so I appreciate the information there. Wayne, I just want to have you talk a little bit about how you look at the market. Maybe we can discuss just briefly copper and gold. That would be the focus metals of the company, most likely going forward here. But currently, how do you look at the copper and gold market in terms of market events out there, investor sentiment for exploration companies in the Middle East? Tie that together, and why gold and copper, and what do you think of those two metals at this point?
Right. Yeah. Overall, we see the big geopolitical play that's going on and the turbulence that someone like Donald Trump has brought to the market. I think that it's good and disabling at the same time. But in terms of the commodity gold, we see the flight from U.S. bonds into more solid commodities like gold. We've seen that consistently. China and Soviet Union, and even United States repatriating gold from England. And Saudi Arabia's been a very good gold buyer. So we've seen the gold outperform the S&P for a number of years now, and I see that it's interesting. I'm looking at these old 43101s, and they're not too old, 2 or 3 years old, and we're seeing what they're using for their assumptions on their modeling. $1,200, $1,500 gold, $1,700 now. Most recent I'm looking at 43101s and JORC at $2,500 gold. So we've seen a very good movement in gold, and I think a flight to more surety in their assets, that a number of countries and even the individuals are holding more gold. And also with that, we see that a number of junior exploration companies are having difficulty with raising equity, and I've been seeing more mid-tier and majors more interested in supplementing that need for capital from juniors and going into these smaller junior players, and also building up their own exploration department. As for copper, it's interesting. Copper was used for copper wire. Now it's called a critical metal, along with all the other critical metals we see. And this has been good news, I think, for our sector. There's been a very strong move, particularly in the Middle East, where we've seen China, their Silk Road initiative expanding to access their rare earths and other commodities like copper across the world. I've seen in the last couple of years that particularly Saudi Arabia has become a center point for developing their own mining and mineral sector and wanting to become a center hub for manufacturing in the future. And they've spent the trillions of dollars in developing their own economic base. And they call it in Saudi Arabia the three-pillar strategy, Vision 2030, where Saudi Arabia, up until about 5 years ago, relied mostly on petrochemicals for their economy. Now they've expanded into the second leg of manufacturing downstream. So that's a requirement for the raw materials. So they're just not looking at mining, but taking that from bauxite to aluminum ingots and further down the chain, as well as they've developed their tourism and finance industry substantially. You see a number of 6-star hotels being built there. And I think that most recently we've seen the visit of Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia, and his focus has really brought attention, I think, all across the globe, that Saudi Arabia is open for business, both for foreign investment and also for investing abroad. And we see that in the last 2 years have done a number of foreign investments. A company called Manara bought 10% of Vale for $1 billion. It's Manara is an offshoot of Ma'aden Gold. Ma'aden Gold is the state company that was founded by actually one of our directors in 1996, Dr. Abdallah Dabag. It's the largest gold company in Saudi Arabia. It's owned half by the Saudi stock market public and then half by BIF, which is a private investment fund held by the royal family. We've seen, the attention increase substantially in terms of foreign investment into Saudi Arabia. And I think even for myself, 5 years ago when I was in Egypt, there was a sort of a dark veil over Saudi Arabia. Everyone thought, all the women are in burqa, they can't drive cars. It was a closed society. It was hard to get visas, particularly if you weren't North American. If you were from India or Bangladesh, it would be next to impossible unless you were on a work visa. But this veil has been taken off, and I've been picked up by Uber drivers that were women. The society has become very liberal. You see, most of the engineers and geologists I work with in their 30s have all graduated from Michigan State, from Boston, from Canadian universities. So it's really changed a lot, and they really want to make Saudi Arabia a hub of manufacturing. And if you look at Saudi Arabia in the map, it's centralized to access into Southeast Asia, to Africa, all the minerals there available, and also access easily to the European and North American market. And so there's been, I think, a lot of focus in this region. And so this is, I see as a great opportunity, not only for Kenz, but a lot of foreign companies are wanting to come in to begin the exploration work that not worked on for more than 50 years. So it's a great opportunity.
Saudi Arabia is definitely a place that's off a lot of folks' radars. But at the same time, certainly there's increasing interest, especially with some of the pro-government policies towards mining and metals industry development in the country as well. Wayne, why don't we get into the company here? Why don't you just give us just a quick overview of where we stand with the company today, and maybe a little bit of a background as to maybe some of the reasons why you set this company up as a private company and are moving forward with hopefully a public company in the future. But just talk a little bit about that, as well as your alignment to see the company succeed.
I look at, I guess I have a different view on how I enter markets in my career. I usually try not to go wherever everyone else is, and I kind of stand back at 60,000 feet and ask myself the same questions maybe they asked themselves 30, 50, 20 years ago. Why are they there? And I've done that, and I did that to Egypt. I was looking at when I was leaving presidency at Regency Silver, I was following a gentleman called Najib Sawaris. Najib is the wealthiest man in Egypt. He's also the largest shareholder of Endeavour Mining. He's a real big gold bug. And I was following him on CNBC and internet, and he was talking about the Egyptian gold licensing round, and for the first time ever invest in his own country, Egypt. So I followed him. I was second Canadian company to be there, and other than Barrick. And I took the same stance in Saudi Arabia, other than, I've been invited to Tanzania, to Burkina Faso, to DRC, but for two reasons. The rule of law is very unstable there, and they've been actively explored for the last 50, 60, 70 years. So I wanted to look at countries that haven't been actively explored, and my knowledge of the Arab Nubian Basin was pretty extensive from my work in Egypt and also looking at Sudan. And it was obvious to me that there was an opportunity in Saudi Arabia to exploit that gap between what we've seen in a lot of countries where they've been explored extensively, where Saudi Arabia up until 5 years ago really had a closed market to mining opportunities. So I on my own, one day I spoke with one of my directors, Tuki, and I said, Tuki, you know someone in Saudi Arabia? A day later, he gives me a phone number of a geologist, Gary German, and spoke with Gary. And Gary fortunately worked with the Saudi company Ma'aden Gold. As I said, it's the largest gold company now in Saudi Arabia. But back in 1996, it was made up of one Saudi called Dr. Abdallah Dabag, very well-known person in Saudi Arabia, particularly in the mining sector. Previously was a director of Saudi Aramco and was head of the King Fahd University. He started Ma'aden Gold in 1996 with 6 Canadian geologists. I spoke with Gary. A day later, I spoke to Dr. Abdallah Dabag. 2 weeks later, I was in Dubai having a meeting with him. A week later, I was having a meeting with the Deputy Minister of Minerals, His Excellency Al Mudaffar. So in 2022, there's an investment license which needs to be received by the government for foreign investment, and I was the first Canadian company in Saudi Arabia to receive an investment license other than Barrick Gold. And so, I've always taken the view of going into new markets, and given that the government of Saudi Arabia has really made an effort to make Saudi Arabia a nation. They've got some of the best fiscal terms in the world in terms of royalties. They've got 5-year tax holiday on production. They'll finance up to 75% of your capex. They put incentive programs towards exploration of up to 25% of your capital cost per license, up to $2 million US. They've really gone over the top to entice foreign investment in their exploration sector. So we went in there. Myself, I used a company, South African company that I used in Egypt extensively called MSA Group. It's like SRK. They're a consultancy firm, mostly focused on Africa, of course, and Middle East. So through their advice, we reviewed a number of licenses, and we started the process of doing our on-the-ground site visit and assessment of number of exploration blocks. That's how I initially got there. So
I appreciate you walking us through that, and certainly an interesting set of projects here, and we want to get into that here in just a moment. Another thing here, obviously, we like to discuss with these introduction programs, capital structure as well. I'd like to cover that in the administrative side first, and then we'll jump into some of the projects and some of the focus areas, because you guys do have a lot of grounds and have a lot of work ahead of you here. Just on capital structure as it stands right now, the company is private, but nonetheless, cover off for us the shares on issue, current cash on hand here, as well as what you can say about the shareholder roster, including yourself and management.
Sure. As you said, we're a private company. What I've done in most of my companies I've started, we rely on a small group of friends and family, local brokers, been my good followers for 20 plus years. In this case, again, I took investors that had financed me in Red Sea Resources. I brought a number of them into Kenz. Our current capital structure is currently 33 million shares. We've closed our second tranche at 15 cents. We have raised about $500,000, have about that in the bank right now. We're looking at closing the rest of the $1 million by the end of June. That'll give us about 35 million shares outstanding, and that's going to go towards our currently our 7 projects. The way that licensing works there, you're issued a pending license first, and then an issued license. So all the licenses we have except for one are all pending. The pending means they're assessing local environmental, military, regional department approvals. That usually takes anywhere from 3 to 9 months. So most of our projects, I believe, will be issued very shortly, by mid this year. There's a minimum expenditure for these projects, which is the first year $750 per square kilometer, and then $250 the next year. The unique thing about Saudi Arabia, where you don't see in most countries with this kind of prolific opportunity in the exploration side, is there's very little historical on all the projects we've looked at, and so we've had to really rely on a very strong team to put us in the right areas, because there's not. I can take you to Tanzania and I can show you 2-3 projects with 15,000-20,000 meters of drilling from 10 years ago, and you go to Arizona or Peru, there's always a lot of historical exploration, where in Saudi Arabia, other than the main company, Ma'aden Gold, and a number of other Saudi companies, there's very little extensive exploration work that's been done. It's almost historically relies on artisanal mining, historical mining from hundreds of years ago. So it's a very different situation. So the one thing that I focused on is getting local talent on the geological side that understands the region. Unfortunately, there's a lot of Western geologists that know a lot about the Arab Nubian Shield. So we brought in, of course, I brought in a very strong team made up of Abdallah Dabag, Dr. Abdallah. As I said, he's a founder of Ma'aden Gold. He took Ma'aden from a startup company to, I think the market cap is $23 billion right now. And of course, he's since retired, but he's given me the privilege of bringing him on as an advisor. In many ways, it's like walking around with the Pope in Saudi Arabia, because he basically, the whole history of the Saudi mining industry started with this one gentleman. So he's very well known, great door opener, a lot of respect for him. And also I brought in another gentleman called Sami Madal. Sami was most recently, he just resigned as a director of Barrick Gold for Saudi Arabia. He's got over 40 years of exploration and mining experience in Saudi Arabia, incredible wealth of knowledge, and highly respected as well. And I brought in some key geologists, in particular a gentleman called Nadir Enor, and he's Sudanese. And just to quickly go on to this point, when you're going into a region, you really rely on local knowledge, and where we find that the Saudis know very well the general geology of Saudi Arabia, but the Sudanese, as you may know, Sudan is the second largest gold producer in Africa. However, they have only one operating mine. The rest is all artisanal workings. And you ask yourself, how do Sudan be the second largest gold producer? I think number 2, number 3. But they have no operating mines. It's the Arab Nubian Basin, where it's all exposed rock. You have massive amount of oxide, gold caps. You have alterations, shear zone, all on surface, and that's amenable to open pit, small scale mining. But this extends across the Red Sea into Saudi Arabia. So during one of the civil wars in Sudan about 4 or 5 years ago, we're talking hundreds of Sudanese geologists coming into the Saudi market, and with their knowledge of on the ground exploration, some great structural geologists, exploration geologists. We've been fortunate to take some of the best guys that had come over to Saudi Arabia as part of our team. So we've got guys that are literally walking the ground every day, making new discoveries. And all of our blocks we've looked at to date have not come from auctions yet or from direct licensing. We've relied on our on the ground skill set with finding new opportunities here and working with local companies in setting up joint ventures to exploit them. So we've kind of it's a little bit different format than you would see in a lot of countries, where you're going over top of another junior company that may want to joint venture or option or have an earn in on a company. All the blocks that we've looked at have had zero or no modern exploration work other than satellite, some mapping maybe. There lies the opportunity and also sometimes the difficulty, because a lot of the first thing people will ask you here in North America, say, well, what's work's been done to date? How much has been spent previously? Is there any previous 43 101s in the region? And a lot of the time we have to say no, but we are in very prolific gold and copper producing areas, both mesothermal, organic, and VMS.
If you can, talk just a little bit about the investor demographic thus far. It's a small private company. There are some investors there, including yourself and management. Just talk a little bit of what you
Yes,
can say about some of the folks that are involved.
sure. As a founder, it was myself and the Angus group that started the company, and we financed it originally with some friends and family. And David Elliott, one of the founders of Haywood Security, he's been a great supporter of mine. He's a great guy, very knowledgeable in the sector. I've had also the opportunity to, through the building up of my board of directors, I have a number of board members that really helped me with the financing as well. Jeffrey Steiner, he's the chairman of the Canadian Business Council. Formerly, he was chief of staff and minister of defense for Canada. He was very instrumental in bringing back the embassy in Canada into Saudi Arabia. So he's very influential in the area. He's brought in some good investors, as well as Julian Ovens, again, a very well-known Canadian, formerly head of strategic investments for Rio Tinto. So we've keeping the investment group tight for now. We've raised about $2 million to date. So last I checked, about 49% of the shares are held by people that we've developed, and the rest have come from the Haywood Group, internal brokers, preferred clients. But now we're wanting to expand that profile to more investors, and we're starting to talk with brokerage firms. But our intention is to take Kenz public, of course, to realize liquidity for our investors and new investors. We're in a position now where we've been approached by a number of Canadian companies wanting to discuss some type of merger. We see that this is a good opportunity to take a look at the market. With the help of Haywood, we're beginning to look at some of these opportunities to reach out and go public sometime, if not this year, early next year, after our first drilling program is completed.
We're going to get into the drilling program here in just a moment. One other thing, kind of on the administrative side, Saudi Arabia has certainly been more vocal about its pro-government policies there in the country to encourage natural resource development. Talk about some of the key items of the economic structure for the government in terms of the income tax there that could be subject to a operation, royalty rates, if there's free carried interest ownership, any other key financial requirements there in the country that would obviously maybe not impact an exploration company, Wayne, but obviously on a production side would impact. Just talk a little bit about that so the audience can get a flavor for
Sure,
the financial regime there.
sure. The one thing I find, most regimes, they're looking short term, particularly Africa. A lot of these have carried interest and high royalties, whereas Saudi Arabia has more of a long term view. They're looking at, as I said, they're looking at the 3-pillar strategy, where they want to industrialize their country, and they want to take the copper concentrate straight to the manufacturing side. We see that in the way that they've established their fiscal terms, as low as 3% royalty, 20% income tax. You have a 5-year tax holiday from the time of production. They have, as I said, 75% capex financing based on a bankable feasibility study. So they're really looking at not generating long-term revenue from royalties and carry interest. They're looking at generating long-term benefits for their whole country, nation, by the downstream, and that's where where they see the best benefit for their country, and it's not just from a high royalty or carried interest. So this is what I really see as a difference between a lot of regimes and what Saudi Arabia is doing. So there's so many incentives, and the door is wide open for companies. They do have quite a few hurdles that a junior company have to think about when they enter Saudi Arabia. You have to first qualify with the Ministry of Investment. So you have to provide 2-year financial statements. You have to show you have the technical capability to perform there, as well as you have the financial capabilities. So you can't just go in there with a zero balance sheet and one or two guys thinking you can apply for licenses or not. It took me almost 6 months to receive my MISA license. It's funny, the mentality back then was you went there. Of course, I showed a balance sheet with $1.4 million in losses, as most exploration companies would. Carried a loss from another transaction. And the gentleman at the ministry said, we were initially rejected because we had no income. And I had to explain to the deputy minister that exploration companies don't have income. I had to get my CFO and even the brokerage firm to explain that exploration companies don't have income. We only have losses. And hopefully, eventually, we have a liquidity event or a merger or sale. So interesting that the perception there is that everyone should have income. So this is the first thing. And but once you're inside Saudi Arabia, you get a tremendous amount of assistance from the Ministry of Commerce, from MIM, we say the Ministry of Minerals. It's called the Ministry of Investment and Minerals. They've done a very good job in the last 4 years in advertising their country and the incentive programs. In June, I think the Ministry of Minerals will be doing a small symposium in Toronto, associated with the TSX, and then in Vancouver with the CSE. So they're really trying to show the market that they're open for business. And as I said, they have the best fiscal terms in the world, I think. They also have a rule of law, which is very strong. This goes against a lot of countries that Canadian and U.S. juniors are working in, where you're not quite sure who's going to be ruling the country the next day. So it's very comfortable to work in the country, other than the summer heat. It's a good place, a good jurisdiction to work in.
Thank you for that, Wayne. Yeah, it's always interesting to get when you look at places like Africa and the Middle East, certainly taking a look at things like the corporate tax rates, the free carry rates, what those look like, varies by jurisdiction, and of course, royalties. So appreciate you going through that. We have a pretty good understanding of Saudi Arabia and where they're headed as far as their natural resource development. But why don't we talk the main exploration project? You guys want to deliver some exploration results. You guys have a core project that's in focus among lots of other projects. It's hard to keep focused on one because there's a number that look pretty good. Cover off the main exploration project, Wayne. What has been done so far on the project, as well as the plans until you guys plan to go public, or maybe over the next 12 months for that exploration work, and what would you like to demonstrate out of this program?
We have about 8 or 9 projects right now, depending on if we're going to take some of those pending licenses into being issued. As I said, one of the things here, all of our projects have had no modern day exploration on it. So it's not like we can refer back to a 43-101. We're looking at the analogs of nearby mines, the operating mines, of course, very good geological database, satellite, and geochem that's covered the country. But we focused on the exploration blocks, in part of the historical mining. But in the last couple of years, a lot of artisanal mining has occurred on our properties, and this most has been stopped now by the government. They realized there was a lot of artisanal mining, as I said, very similar to Sudan, where you can go on surface. Alluvial gold is abundant in these areas. Large alteration on surfaces, large gold oxide caps. So particularly focused on one. And the reason why is that we want to take one to a PEA within the next year and a half, and that would allow us to qualify, have a qualified persons report as part of our listing requirements, either for an RTO or a go public listing. And that's a MRT. It's in about the center of Saudi Arabia. It's called the Alfi region. There's 12 regions, mineralogical regions in Saudi Arabia. The Alfi region is the most prolific gold-bearing region, orogenic gold, copper, and this is where a majority of the mines are in and about, runs northwest across the center of Saudi Arabia. And Amarti is interesting that it's a orogenic gold deposit between the metasediments and the volcanics, the boundary, and it's fault related, a massive intrusion. And it was an undiscovered finding up until about 3 years ago, where a very large artisanal mining operation went in and they opened up about 1 kilometer by 1.7 kilometers of the surface of the gold oxide cap. It's interesting. You see the satellite photos before and after. You see from 3 years ago until about a year ago, until the local police stopped all the operations, that they opened a massive amount of this deposit just on surface. They were mostly taking gold from the alteration. It was easy, they could easily find the gold within the alteration. They were leaving the quartz veins alone. We've seen 20 or 30 parallel veins going through the deposit, ranging from a couple to a couple meters in thickness. Just walking the small open pits that cover, that's only 3 square kilometers of 100 square kilometer license that we have. But we focused on this particular area for the fact that you can walk the surface, and you can see the amount of dumps and the amount of work that they were mining up to about 10 to 15 meters in depth. This is very similar to what you would see previously in Arizona, but like in Sudan, for example, very large open pit operations, through artesian mining, but they're only mining the oxide portion of the deposit. We're suspecting one identified the sulfide cap below it. We've seen secondary copper, malachite, quite a bit of gold with samples we've taken. So we see this as a low-hanging fruit that we could go in and do a relatively inexpensive exploration program. This is because of the logistics and infrastructure that is there. We're just literally half a kilometer from a highway, small town nearby. There's none of the situation where you see in a lot of countries will take you millions of dollars just to begin the exploration program. We're looking at a very low threshold exploration program. We're wanting to do. I just received the other day actually our report from our technical partner, which would include a number of samples, IP to identify the sulfide below that. Take this oxide gold cap, which is quite sizable. It's the largest identified gold oxide cap in Saudi Arabia. It's quite extensive, and take that to a preliminary PEA within the next 12 to 14 months. And this would allow us to do two things. It would allow us to rapidly increase the value for the company and its shareholders. This is a very large bulk tonnage potential, and it extends further along the contact between the metasediments and the volcanics. So we see that the potential capability of a small scale or mid scale mining operation could rapidly put us into a cash position whereby we could begin to self-finance our company and support our other exploration programs. And our goal is to become a tier one, to bring our assets into a tier one position. But the ease of being able to go into a small scale type production scenario in Saudi Arabia is a very good situation for us, whereby we're looking at only a $2 or $3 million development scenario where we could be doing 4,000 tons per day in a heap leach type operation. The government is very supportive on small scale mining, and we're talking small scale mining, but when you're pulling up 4,000 tons a day at half a gram to 1 gram cutoff with a $85 per all-in operating cost, the profitability stance on that, something like this, would be very advantageous for us, being a smaller company and wanting to not to go too much to the capital market and be able to self-finance. I think we're in a good situation over the next 1.5 to 2 years to become a small operating company, but at the same time putting those monies into the deeper drilling programs that, as I said, there's not a big history of major exploration programs in Saudi Arabia. So we're going to have to spend a considerable amount of money on locating the deeper targets that would warrant a tier one type of discovery.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys go about orchestrating that here in the future. And it looks like the next 12 months and in advance to a potential listing on a public exchange. Sounds like you guys have a bit of work to do, and excited to see some of those results come out here as well. Wayne, any other comments on some of the other activities the company wants to get done over this next period of time? Any other projects you wanted to point out or discuss? Obviously, we have a dual focus of both exploration and also potentially trying to advance towards some type of small scale production.
In order to maintain your licenses within Saudi Arabia, there is a minimum expenditure you must spend. We do have a quite an extensive portfolio, easily reachable by our field office. They're anywhere from 30 minutes away to 2 hours away. We want to be able to systematically look at each one. So we're in no rush to have all of our licenses issued at one time, keeping some of them in pending mode, because as soon as they come from pending to issued, that means you have to be on the ground. You're getting the ministry wanting quarterly reports, budgets, etc. So we don't want to be under too much pressure to try to deploy 7 or 8 exploration programs at the same time. I don't think that could be possible effectively to do something like this. So we've got a program where in the next 9 months to 12 months, we want to have about 4 to 5 CPR reports, compliant person reports completed. This would mostly be desktop studies because, as I said, a lot of these are on-surface discoveries. Most of them have artisanal mine workings. We're focused on one copper gold. The artisanal miners had opened up 2 pits, 150 by 50 meters. Another one 100 by 100-meter pits, all along trend. So we see the opportunity to make an early discovery in a number of exploration blocks. But we want to systematically, as we build the team, to be able to expand our exploration program. But we don't want to make the mistake of trying to do too much at one time and being undercapitalized and making mistakes. So this will also depend on how fast we grow. The next 6 months will be very interesting for the company. We've got strong financial backing, I believe. We've got a great team in Saudi Arabia, and we've got good support here at Haywood Security. So I see that we're progressively expanding our footprint. We want to be cautious about how fast we expand in Saudi Arabia. As being one of the newer exploration companies, we see a lot of opportunities, but we have to pick and choose our exploration blocks really well. Amarti, for example, we have applied for additional blocks around Amarti to make sure that we cover the extensions of that ore body. We're all pretty happy over here in the programs that we've set up. As I said, we've got a good geological team. We're being well supported by MSA as our third-party compliance partner. So they're reviewing all of our work programs. They'll be actually reviewing our compliant person report as they come out. So we're all ready to have a very good success for the next six to 9 months.
Just on overall strategy, is there any openness to looking at JVing some of the projects that would be deemed non-core after you guys do some further investigation work, monetization strategies surrounding some of the grounds? Obviously, first and foremost, there is a goal to have a large discovery success and potentially sell off to a major.
Yeah.
Obviously, production success is one of the goals here as well. But beyond that, what else would you include in the strategy of the company?
I think one of the things that particular unique situation in Saudi Arabia, not having hundreds of exploration companies, in Saudi Arabia, or a history of exploration and mining in Saudi Arabia, there's abundant of opportunities for junior exploration companies. So we believe that the portfolio that we've put together, and we're still looking at additional blocks, would be for a project generation model as well, where some of our non-core assets, or as we start to develop some of our near-term production assets, and we look at potentially optioning out with other Canadian juniors, even particularly with some mid-tiers that have some strong results. We find a number of mid-tiers are, as you know, and you mentioned in your shows before, that they're starting to replace a lot of the equity requirements juniors are looking for to expand their operation. So I think that in the last couple of years I've been in Saudi Arabia, we're seeing more and more juniors and majors wanting to come into Saudi Arabia. The interesting thing here, Andrew, is typically when and I've seen this with the large Chinese companies like Norinco, Jilin, Australian majors are coming in. They're looking for brownfield. They're looking for previous mines to go back in and make a rediscovery. There's not really that kind of opportunity in Saudi Arabia because for the reasons I previously mentioned. So in order for a mid-tier or major to come in, they may have to step a couple layers down and look at companies like ourselves to get an early foothold into the Saudi Arabian market. And by no means because there's no, there's maybe 12 or 14 mines within Saudi Arabia where, if you look at the Canadian Shield, there's hundreds of mines. That doesn't mean by any means that there's no huge potential for Saudi Arabia in the future. It's just that there's been no exploration discoveries for the last 50 years other than a couple Saudi companies. So I, I'm starting to find that we could be entertaining a lot of mid-tiers and juniors in the next years to come. And also, I think because of the openness of the Saudi government for exploration and incentives, that there'll be a lot of junior companies wanting to come into Saudi Arabia. I think that we've developed our own proprietary portfolio database of projects, and right now I think that we could be one of the premier exploration companies in Saudi Arabia. I think right now we're probably in the top three in terms of exploration holdings as a foreign company within Saudi Arabia, and that's not saying a lot. It's just saying that it's in a very immature place right now. So there's a lot of room for a lot of companies to grow, and I think that Kenz has a nice potential portfolio to allow some junior companies to come in a little bit more quickly by joint venturing with us or potentially doing a farm in on one of our projects, and we could give them our knowledge and expertise and helping them come into the market a little easier and quicker than we have over the last 3 years.
The folks that are in here early definitely have some advantages and get that lead edge, if you will, on some of the other folks that are trying to come in there. So good information on that front and how you guys are viewing the various components of that overall strategy. With respect to local community, you talked a little bit about the Saudi government, but any further comments on Saudi government relations as well as your guys' strategy with respect to local community work in the project areas? I'm guessing some of this area is pretty remote, not a lot of community, but just talk a little bit about that.
Sure. The Saudi Arabia being a relatively large country, it's about the size of Europe, only have about 30 million residents there. As you would imagine, it's a very dispersed population. Most of the population centers on the sea in Jeddah, Mecca, Riyadh, the capital. There is some areas which have been relatively restricted for mining activities. It's mostly to do with development of their other sectors like the entertainment, hotel industry. The community, we have to still go through the same process with any exploration. We meet with the local community leaders. And in Saudi Arabia, there's 22 tribes, sheikhs. There's a sheikh for each tribe. So we have good relationships with all of the local tribal leaders and as well as the governors in the areas. And as I said, it's a very rural area. A lot of things you have to consider is there's not a lot of water there. There's some deeper aquifers, so there's a consideration for the local communities that we don't disturb their water sources, as well for issues that maybe you don't think about. But trenching, for example, the local communities want us to refill the trenches after we complete our trenching, and that's because we would never think about it, but camels would fall into it, break their legs, or sheep would get trapped in it. Little issues like this, but we've hired in our field office that we've developed in Elfie. We're hiring a lot of the regional staff for local drivers, laborers, and we keep a good relationship with the community. It's a very, very relaxed atmosphere there. There's no tension, as long as you respect their culture and their language, and we have good locals that work with us as well. So
Very early stage here, Wayne, about as early as it gets. Very green fields here. So looking forward to seeing what occurs here on the progress front on community and, of course, utilization of local folks to help advance the project. So always a good idea. On the administrative side, back there real quick, Wayne, I forgot to ask earlier, any plans on the horizon there to get a public listing? You've talked a little bit about this, but can you give us any more flavor as to a preference of exchange, jurisdiction? What do you think the timing would be, and what style of listing are you looking at? Would it be RTO? Talk a little bit more about that.
I think through some of our major investors, it could be obviously an RTO of one of the TSX vehicle that held by friendlies. I guess say that would be easy to work with. Definitely, we'd want to have a U.S. listing to combine with that. The U.S. market is a very big sector, I think, for us, And some of our investors have asked straight up is that they would like a U.S. listing for their clients as well. It's something that I really haven't thought about too much, but by a number of the Saudi potential investors, they've asked us about listings as well as you have, but also on the Saudi market, they have a secondary market now, like the TSXV version, where the listing requirements are lower. They've had some relatively good success in other sectors, and I haven't delved into it too much, but could be something of interest in the future after our primary listing here in Toronto or the CSE and the US to look at a Saudi listing. The valuations are very, very high on their stocks in Saudi Arabia. But that's something that we're not looking at right now. But definitely, I think that in 2026, once we have our first 43101s compliant person reports completed, we definitely want to actively look at a Canadian listing with a U.S. listing.
Yeah, Wayne, I think that makes sense. A Canadian listing obviously is the primary, makes sense. To get a local listing would be fantastic if you guys can achieve that. Often we looked at some of these jurisdictions over in Africa and the Middle East, and a local listing is always useful for utilization of local exchange, of course, in part of those government efforts, working with the government as well and having that local connection. US OTC listing along with the Canadian listing would make some sense. And
Yeah,
sounds like
definitely.
RTO is probably the way to go here that you guys are going to look at based on some of the relationships you already have involved with the company already. I'm sure it can come across some shells to put that into. So very good information here. And it sounds like we have a bit of a time frame as to when this will happen. Um, just for other investors out there, some of the audience listening in, the opportunity for potentially one more private financing. Anything on that front as far the potential for another financing before you go public?
Yeah, I think that our expectations, we hope to close this last tranche on our 15-cent financing by the end of June. We're in discussions, of course, with several people here, some other brokerage firms, as well as a number of Saudi family offices and companies. And I'll be back there the following week, back in Dubai and Saudi Arabia for that specific reason and some other reasons in terms of transferring the licenses. But I believe that being a startup company with hopefully discoveries coming on board, that we don't want to overfinance it and dilute ourselves too quickly. But I believe that the projects that we will focus on, particularly Amarty, will produce very quick results because it's on surface. It's a massive gold oxide operation pit previously. So we know there's ore there. It's just a matter of how much. So we want to identify that quickly, as well as take one or two of our other projects to CPR. So I think we can increase value very quickly, but that's also going to turn out to require additional financing by the end of this year, I believe. So we will need to looking at our pro forma expenditures in the light that we do get good news from these projects, that we'll need to raise another $2 or $3 million prior to an RTO, and this would cover the phase 2 program on Amarty if we're successful with phase 1 and a number of the other projects. And also, as you know, it does cost quite a bit to go public. Even on RTO, you're looking at a couple $100,000 in legal fees and listing fees, and then you have to bring on additional people. Being fortunately a private company now, we don't have to have this big engine to communicate to the market, to have that part of the company where it does take us a substantial amount of administrative costs and effort to keep a company maintained on the listing and to communicate to public shareholders. So, we're definitely going to need to raise some more capital prior to that event occurring.
Good for some of the audience there who's looking at this and it has interest, can look at maybe a couple more opportunities to finance before the company goes public. Well, short of any other comments that you have, why don't we go ahead and leave it there for now. For potential investors who are listening in, the company has a market capitalization of about 5.5 million Canadian dollars. Why should Kenz Global Resources be considered within the institutional, family office, and retail investors' portfolio at this stage?
I believe we have a tremendous upside given, I think, the quality of our current exploration blocks. Even though they're greenfield, they're all on surface discoveries, through artisanal mining and historical mining. We're located near operating mines, large operating mines. we're in a great jurisdiction, and we're first movers in Saudi Arabia. The investors or new investors will find that we're a very well managed company. We've got great support from one of the leading brokerage firms here in Canada, so we know we got the momentum to move forward, to continue to finance the company, but also to take the company public and generate the liquidity event for current shareholders, future shareholders, and also expose ourselves to a lot of these mid tiers and majors that are wanting to get into the region and haven't come yet. And as I said previously, there are, I know of many tier one companies wanting to come into this region, and obviously they're going to look in Saudi Arabia and look at the companies that are operating there, and Kent's going to be one of the leading junior exploration companies in Saudi Arabia. It's obvious that I hope we have a bright future for the company and our investors.
And Wayne, for investors seeking further information, how can they reach the company?
Best is to reach myself, Koshman at KenzResources.com. And we've just put up a website. Because we're a private company, we haven't taken a really big need to have an elaborate website. We're actually in the process of putting a full website out. Due to the confidentiality of a lot of our projects as they're being transferred to our company, we want to keep that semi-private for now. You can reach me on my Kenz email address. Be more than happy to entertain any of your questions, or if you want to have take a look at our current financing round, we'd be more than pleased to discuss that with you.
Wayne, well, thank you for the introduction to Kenz Global Resources. Keep up the work with launching the company, and of course, best of luck in Saudi Arabia with the projects. Looking forward to having you back in the future.
Andrew, thank you so much, and you have yourself a nice day. Thank you.